All right, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Relationship Led Growth Live. We got Joseph Lewin with us as usual, Mike Grimberg here, and our esteemed guest, John Salisbury from Nexagen, founder of Nexagen. We're going to be talking about a really interesting topic, a topic I think we're going to let John have most of the floor, I think, today, as opposed to usual, where I have a lot of things to talk about. I have more questions than answers on this one. And for those of you who've been waiting, sorry, we're running a little late, some technical difficulties. So hopefully you're still around and want to listen to us blabber on about AI. So we're gonna be talking about AI and advisory firms, and I'm gonna set the stage for us a bit. Obviously we're a growth advisory firm ourselves. We work with a lot of consulting firms and advisory firms as our client base, and everybody that I speak to, whether it's a prospective client, an existing client, just in general in the industry, is talking about AI in one way, shape, or form. They're either asking questions about it, they're talking about implementing it, or how they have implemented it, and all sorts of things. And I mean, in general, it's sort of taken everything by storm, if you will, and everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. But there are a lot of I think concerns and trepidations in this industry in particular. And that's even considering, John, you posted something on LinkedIn just maybe a few hours ago about one of the things you mentioned was Accenture. I think they had what $1.2 billion in revenue from AI projects just in the last year.
Just in 2024, I think it was
Right.
650 million. Yeah.
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 So
And that's one of the big four. So four times that number easily, and then it's
yeah.
going to increase. Yeah.
Yep. So it's here no matter whatever we want to say about it. But when I talk to folks in our in this kind of advisory consulting space, there are definitely concerns around. There are extra concerns around security, especially if they are working with regulated industries, right? So not only are you worried about your own data, you're worried about your clients' data. We work with a number of clients in the biotech and life sciences space, right? They've got healthcare, et cetera. They've got access to all sorts of PII and things like that, where like that's dangerous stuff. I mean, and we've seen hacks and things like that in recent months, and whatnot in that space. Then you got trust in terms of do people trust us with this information if we're using it in this way? And then that gets into the other thing I hear often is like the perception of AI usage, meaning if I am a highly paid consultant or advisor and I'm telling you openly that I'm using AI to, again, in our space, it might be to create content, it might be to brainstorm strategy, it might be whatever it is. What is the perception of that to the prospective client or the existing client of, well, why am I paying you this much? Like you're just kicking this over the AI fence, if you will.
Yeah.
And maybe that's normal, but those are the things that I consistently hear and have conversations about. And the other thing, maybe to set the stage, is to me they're like broad strokes, two types of firms in the sense that you've got the technology implementers, software development firms, things like that, right? For those, some of the use cases seem to be a lot more straightforward, like coding and whatnot. On the advisory side, though, it's a little bit less so, right? We see it on the marketing, content creation, things like that. But then, what else is there? Where I'd love to pick your brain on is how can these types of organizations be leveraging the technology to improve their operations, to improve their delivery, things like that. So I'm gonna stop blabbing. I just threw a lot at you.
Yeah.
That's sort of the framing for this conversation.
Yeah. That's the kind of how people do it, though. They go at it big. It's a big landscape, and they want to kind of frame it, and then they want to zoom in to okay, now I want this specific thing, right? So it sort of starts big always.
Yep.
So,
Oh, go ahead. Go for it.
no, go for it, please.
I mean, I think to me, one of the interesting places to start would be is what are you what are you seeing? Obviously, you're in the software development space. I mean, this is right up your alley. what are you seeing on your end in terms of like, does everything I'm talking about, does that jive with what kind of the questions you're getting and things like that?
Yeah, it's like levels. So like small companies that have few amount of employees, they're just rolling quick and they use this very different kind of technology. So they might, if they have a developer on staff, he's connecting into an API, which is hooked into an LLM, and he's just feeding it with data and making functional applications. And he's probably not thinking about the security side, and there's not much governance. So then you get into the mid market. They have developers that are probably more cautious. They probably know that there's this whole saying of known knowns, known unknowns, and then unknown unknowns, and we
Yeah.
have like lots of all that. um, and as you mature up, you realize there's more unknown unknowns, so it slows you down, and you have more governance put in place, which slows you down. So all like cybersecurity is an inhibitor to innovation in a lot of organizations. So in that mid-market space, I'm seeing them use more mature tools. They're trying to lean on existing vendors like Microsoft or an Amazon or somebody like that. And the products aren't completely baked yet. And then they're starting to get going, but they're trying to do some in a somewhat of a secure posture. And then in the enterprise space, their data is worth the most and they have the most data. So they're the most cautious, and you have infighting in between teams. So you have ML operation teams, which are relatively new. You have cybersecurity teams, which are liable for anything that goes wrong. In fact, they will fire the CISO if a mistake happens. So he's liable. So he's not going to want to pull the trigger real quick because you're throwing him a bunch of new stuff no one's tested. And honestly, the ML teams are giving an operous a mandate to innovate quickly, and then they throw over the tools after they're building, and the cybersecurity guy's like, hey, I don't even know what this is. I haven't approved it. I haven't reviewed it. Like, no, we're not managing it. So I'm sure there's just confusion, and that happens when you have a high velocity of change. So for standardization, formalization, new operations are taking place. So on the big side, we're seeing center of excellences become like more a part of the conversation, where it works a lot like a project management board or a change management board. In the mid market, we're seeing adoption happen in all these markets. It's actually I'm going to say it's a way to frame it. It's learning how to walk, then it's walking, then it's speed walking maybe, and then it's running, and then flying is kind of like where you're at, I guess. And then I see that mid market organization, they're learning how to walk. In the enterprise market, they're doing the same thing, but at a different level. And in the small space, they're like, hey, we know how to run already. But most of them are learning how to walk, but they're running while they're doing it. So it's sort of like there's all sorts of mistakes happening everywhere in my mind. Um, where I was kind of lucky is I got involved in the Cincinnati AI Catalyst, and that's all about responsible AI. And I got to meet all these other AI leaders that were talking about these topics about responsible AI. And that kind of allowed me to mature and formalize in my mind, because I could get validation from other people quickly. And it helped me think about transparency more. We were already focusing on security and privacy. It helped me think about human-led initiatives, AI for good, DEI, and accessibility options. And I have now a brain trust that I can go interact with that's kind of like goes across all those different verticals. And I get feedback like, hey, here's an idea. What do you guys think? And they're like, that's horrible. Or they're like, that's a good idea. We could use that. So I would say you want to stay active. You want to use it. And it's like, where do I plug in? So most companies are hitting the easy button and they're like, hey, Copilot. Copilot is a productivity tool. So it's going to help you write emails. It's going to help you analyze some data, small amounts of data, not big amounts. It's going to do a lot less than you think. And people just inherently think it's secure. It's not. So to get onto Copilot, we have like an assessment program we do, or a readiness assessment type of program. From there, you look at like RBAC permissions, you look at data sensitivity levels, which feed into this thing called data loss prevention. And that's basically in your email, if you've sent someone a credit card or your bank account information, before that data gets into the LLM, which can tell everybody in the world about it, it blocks it. It doesn't allow it in the LLM through this DLP or data loss prevention service. But there's like services inside of Microsoft that you're not allowed to put data sensitivity labels on. So it'll just bypass those filters. and people store information in OneNote. So for instance, OneNote is like not a tool that you can use to store that type of information. And if you set it up as connected into Copilot, you've just opened up all of that data to your LLM. And then if a hacker comes in, you're screwed. And Copilot doesn't allow LLM firewalls, which are basically ways to prevent that from happening from all your data, even if it doesn't have sensitivity labels. You just do it in front of the LLM, and it doesn't even have the capability to allow that access. So that's just one specific thing, just on productivity, and you run into all those challenges. Who do you call? Well, we want to be that company that you call that helps consult you through that, design programs, and all so forth. But there's a bunch of other companies like that as well. But they're just learning. Most of the organizations are learning about these things real time, and then they're communicating out. And there's just not a lot of education on it right now. So we're all kind of learning. In my mind, though, we're kind of like at the front of that, and we're helping to educate a lot. So I am doing a lot more talks and speaking in a lot of meetings and stuff like that.
So I could take this in a million different directions,
Yeah.
just based on what you said. And again, I think we're all drinking from a fire hose right now on all this stuff.
Hey, Mike, before we go any deeper, I think something that can help just kind of like pull us up one level and then we can go deeper from there is with a professional services firm. I'm just thinking if somebody's listening to this, they want to be using AI, they're on the fence. I think the first question is just, should they? And if they should, what are like the 2 or 3 things they should think about? And I'm talking, these are people who don't necessarily know about AI at all. Other than that, there's value out there. Maybe they've done some cursory learning. They don't want to miss the boat. But, for one, should they jump in? And if they are, what are 2 or 3 things that they need to think about up front?
So right off the bat, it's like working with a human in my mind. You can't read its mind. It says stuff that's wrong half the time. It has bias. It has opinions. It's like working with a human kind of to a degree. So it's challenging to work with, but you got to learn that relationship. I equate it to riding a horse. And a human rides a horse. I've shown a picture of it before, but it's the horse could be leaned over 100% on its side, taking a hard turn. And the human on top, the cowboy guy, is like smoking a cigarette and just totally chill, like in complete control. But the horse is just leaning hard, trying to get the cattle like set up in a certain range, right? So that's the relationship is sort of dynamic like that. So you want to get uses and activity on the program. So you want to sign up for ChatGPT. You want to use some of these tools. You don't want to just give it all of your data. You just want to play with it, ask it questions, see how it responds. Give it some data, like don't be afraid to upload a document that doesn't have a bunch of sensitive information for it. Ask you to analyze it. But that's just kind of like learning how the relationships works. The power comes in these deeper tools, which are like for small businesses right now, like a place like Custom GPT, we can set you up there with our friend over there that can spin up a nice, easy LLM for you to interact with. It's not super expensive, and send that $10,000 to $20,000 annual. And then you can have your own private ChatGPT, right? Then you can be much more free and you can put a lot more data in there, that kind of stuff, right? So those are like, or there's workflow automation you mature into. So it just depends in that walk cycle where you're at. You're still not running. I feel like when you're running, you're like doing what NVIDIA is doing, and like AI writes all their code and like it's building their chips for them and stuff.
Yeah, so the one interesting part I think to dive into is like if I'm thinking about consulting and advisory firms, like the places where like some level of AI, whether it's process automation or data analysis or whatever, would be valuable is like on their internal data side, like helping them. Usually it's you got a director of operations or somebody on the operations side that's literally their job. They're going, okay, which projects are profitable, which ones are not, why? Like obviously you have to have the right data for that. But is that a place where you've seen firms like that, implement these tools to really help them hone in on the operation side of things?
Yeah, for sure. And you can go deep there, and it's expensive to learn. So and you kind of don't know the outcome 100%. So we've hooked up with all these boutique firms. So you can go work with Deloitte, like we were talking about. Accenture's won $650 million in revenue this year in 2024, something like that. They've outpaced all the VC startups they're claiming. These big enterprises are trying to spend money on it to get moving now. But I'll give you some specific examples. So if you don't want to work with a Deloitte because they're, I don't know, $800 an hour, and you want to work with more of a boutique firm that's maybe $400 an hour or $350 an hour, and you want to get some of this value with an actual AI scientist, we've connected with like 6 firms that have like proven track record guys. Now, one of them came from Samsung, and at Samsung, he was working in their hardware production facility, and they wanted to do predictive maintenance on their hard drives. And they were able to use image recognition to analyze the hard drive production and detect defects prior to production. They were losing, out of 1 million hard drives, I don't know, 150,000 hard drives, or some crazy numbers, like 5%. They were able to reduce it with the deep learning system in place to where it was like just a fraction of that. So maybe it was like 5% of that amount that they had before. So if they had 100% was like 5% that they were losing before due to defects. Now they were down to like 5% of the 5%, right? So it's just a huge increase. I think it saved them 30 million hard drives a month or something like that. Things like that. So that's awesome. You can put that in manufacturing. Put a camera in place, specific kind. Then you have to know what the actual problem is. It has to be well-defined. And then you can ingest that data. Now that's an easier way to ingest data in my mind, because it's not like you have to write it out. So if you think about like RAG systems, which is what you'll hear that word every now and then, that's like a word formulated definition of something, and you're using that for reasoning. When you're using image like detection, like what your example is in robotics or manufacturing, you're looking at the same image from the same angle of the same part moving through the line each time. So it's much more empirical or consistent or trusted data. And you don't have to have a human refining it all the time. Maybe you have to clean the lens like on a maintenance cycle, and you have to like check to validate that the thing's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. But I would say there's application in manufacturing that way. And then if you have your like ERP system like defined well, you have a lot of data in there. You have a data lake, for instance. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You can kind of leverage your ERP or CRM as a data lake or whatnot. You can take and get use out of that data as well. And you can start automation projects. Like you can treat the ERP almost like a RAG. You're not really supposed to 100%, but you kind of can. And then you can start doing automations off your existing application. So for instance, if you had a scheduling service and you have a person that takes the call and then they match make with all your resources and then schedule someone out next week or the following week or a month out. And then when they schedule it out, they have to put in specific things with that resource. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to schedule this person out in 3 weeks, but the customer is on this agreement type. It has this sub agreement attached to it. It has these services with it. This job has this checklist associated with it. It has these resources assigned to it that I want, and the availability is on that day. The client's okay. Well, if that's all really well defined, then the AI can actually complete that task very closely to the task that was going to be completed by the human from a percentage of accuracy standpoint. Now that same human can handle more volume because 95% of the work has been handled by the AI, and we call that human in the loop then. So now a human is now managing the process, not running the process. And they get superpowers because they can do so much more now. And that's sort of the marketing or bias that we're saying on the AI side. But I'm seeing companies take advantage of that, grow, and then with their growth, they're hiring more people. So I'm seeing them spend $200K to gain $5 million in revenue and hire more people. But at the same time, then you see the group out of Europe that displaced 700 FTEs and gained 40 million in profit and did it the exact opposite way. And we celebrate that. And then that's a place where you end up saying like, well, how's this going to end up? If everybody doesn't have jobs, do we end up on universal basic income? And that's a big problem. So like, okay, I always ask this question, who's in charge? Anywhere, who's in charge? Is it me in charge? No, I mean, I'm in charge of my spend. Is the mayor in charge? He's my voice to a group of people. Is the president in charge? Well, he sets policy, but if you look at how policy is enforced, it happens locally, and in policy even happens further at the consumer level. So at some point, we, the consumers, we're in charge. Our dollars count to what is successful and what isn't. And if we unite and decide we don't want to back a company because they're doing things irresponsibly, then they will not be successful. And it's sort of our decision. It depends if we do actually have the power in mass, right? We also have psychosis in mass and all these other things. So, but it's I like to say who's in charge, and I say you are. Take personal responsibility, contribute. Don't spend money where you don't need it. Don't buy the Kit Kat bar that was. If you don't like AI, don't spend money on Kit Kat if they're using all AI and not using humans.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's the what you described. Again, you can take this technical advice to any industry, but I think on the advisory side in particular, where what this is doing is really testing. I mean, at its basic level, it's testing our supply and demand curve, right? Like it's how much demand is there really if we can increase supply by doing this. And in some cases, there's a whole bunch more demand, which means, yep, we just hire more people to do more of the advanced work. Or if there really isn't much more demand, then all you're doing is decreasing price to whatever the AI costs, and that's that, right?
Well, and we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot because prices are going higher, but a lot of that's because we're demanding higher salaries and everything else then inflates after that. And it's sort of like, and then your house price is higher. You're excited that your house price is doubled or tripled, but then you're pissed when you go to buy one and it's doubled or tripled. So, it's sort of the economy. Like I always say, who's in charge? Of like everyone. I don't know. Like we're all kind of contributing and we kind of all go in the same direction.
Yeah.
I feel like.
So let's, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on that. We can talk about the broader societal impacts, I think, for a long time if we wanted to. Bringing it back to the topic at hand, one of the things I personally struggle with, and this where, like in our industry, there's the now infamous Sam Altman quote of, within 5 years, AI is going to replace, 95% of marketing, marketing work or marketing tasks or whatever. And I personally question it. And one of the reasons why I question it is, well, the data. Because you mentioned, like in a lot, the example you're giving on the scheduling side is like, well, if it's well defined and well structured, the AI can do it very accurately. I mean, we work with advisory firms all the time, and none of them have very accurate data, right? And even if they were able to improve it a little bit, now you have data volume, data. There's all sorts of stuff that comes into this. So my question to you is like, how much of this hype that's out there, and we can even let's take this marketing as an example. The same similar arguments have been made with just knowledge work in general. How much of that do you think is hype versus how much do you think that is realistic and time frame wise? Like how long do you think it'll take not just the enterprise, because I feel like the enterprise is better at managing their data because they have more resources to do it. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but like what's the real timeline we're looking at? Because I look at like digital transformation projects. I mean, the average one takes like 3 to 5 years, and most of them don't work. Your data still sucks. So, how realistic is any of that?
Well, you can make it easier on yourself with these virtual assistants. So, like for instance, we have a ticketing system, and no one likes it because it's a pain in the butt. So, I'm just going to go to our example. It makes it easy. So, you have like 50 fields you got to fill out and text, and it's got to be precise, and you got to put extra information and notations and all this kind of stuff. Well, if you set up the AI right and it knows what the perfect ticket looks like, then you just talk to the thing and say, hey, make a ticket. I left this appointment. I did this, and that, and I'm on to the next site, and then close the ticket if you could. But it then knows it has to do all those things. That actually is fairly possible. In our tests, we're scoring like 85% accuracy on that, right? And it actually is annoying to our team because they don't like doing it, and they'd rather focus on the actual work. So there is, we're getting to 85% right now. It's not as accurate as we want it to be. We want it to be in that 95, 98%, it's just not there yet. So you're right. It is a lot of hype right now. It's the potential people are talking about. And then there's these weird conversations about AGI. So, I mean, we can get into that, but that's a whole other, who knows? Everybody says that AI is in its infancy. The transformer technology is somewhat in its infancy, but when I look at the history of the transformer, I think like 1995 is when the term transformer was first starting to being used, or 2005, something like that. But it's been used for a while. It was actually invented in 2017 or 16 out of Google. But the actual precursor to that, which is like the SDS or SDC, I think it is, That was like in 95, 2005, but they were already using the kind of transformer nomenclature. So it's not as new as people think, and that's why these groups just exploded. They didn't just build it overnight. It's been working. They've been working on it for decades. So the promise is there to do a lot. It's just going to take activity and time to figure out how to do it at your organization. But I saw a University of Cincinnati research paper at their AI lab, we signed an MOU with, and we're working on grants together. They were able to achieve 98.8% accuracy on searches that were relevant to the RAG documentation about the RAG. So they were able to score 99% accuracy. That's without citation help. That's just one shot, asking a question and getting a response. They were that much accuracy when they asked about things that were relevant to the RAG. So it depends.
That would be things like, sorry to interrupt, that'd be things, I'm just practical application wise, like knowledge management. Like that kind of thing. Is that what we're talking about here?
There's more like research driven. So they let's say you put a 120-page research document, and then you ask questions about the research document as how accurate was the answer. And that's rated by the human. The human rates the response, because it's not like 1 + 1 = 2. It's based on the language criteria, which is an indefined way to measure something. That's what language is in my mind. But so it gives you this loose thing, but it describes it well enough where a human could definitely take that handoff and move forward with that action. It's accurate and trustworthy. They were at like 98+% accuracy on that data. But when you start looking, like, for instance, a ticketing system or an ERP, if the data in there is actually fairly accurate, like very, very accurate and rigid, then at that point, when it uses that source and you're asking questions for it to replicate it, you can get it up to that 98%. Now you're just looking for variances and problems. And you can almost use another AI to do that. So you end up with like what they call as LLM as judge. So they'll run the AI, they'll run the replication of the set data. Then they'll have another AI look at the two and compare them and find the percentage of potential variance. And then that'll generate a ticket to look at for the error detection. So you're able to like layer these things. And that's why they call them foundational models. So typically you'll get the big foundational model like a Mistral, a GPT, a Gemini, and then they're starting to layer other models on top of it. So we're already seeing models that are called embedded models, which are small specific task models being used for specific things. So now you have this small little model, which costs way less to run, and it's got lower latency associated with it. You can run it inline on an API and now start looking at DLP data or data loss prevention data, like credit cards on the API. That's hugely valuable for, like you mentioned, that hospital use case. Because now a hospital, they have insurance they have covered. They have so much risk that they know exists is exposed. If you throw this in place and it's contextually aware of all the data that comes in place, now it actually can block it. And you actually know the percentage of risk you have. You can actually get down to that 0.003% risk profile. And now you call your insurance company and be like, hey, lower my premiums by half. That's actually a great use case. Or for instance, you have my friend Kelly Cohen, Dr. Kelly Cohen over at University of Cincinnati. He's got a program. It's a startup he built. So everybody has these x-rays of their lungs, right? And it's all over the place. This x-rays of your lungs. There's millions of these data pieces, right? And it's like he was like, hey, if we look at all that data, can I find heart problems? So he's already got the data. It already exists. All the data's there. That's his RAG, right? And then he can now look at the same data that exists for the hospital. And now he can tell patients, hey, you've got a 30% likelihood chance of a heart issue in like the next 24 months. And it's the same data. That's like a great use of AI. That's like that helpful use. And there's humans checking it to validate it. So it's got a human in the loop process built in.
Yeah.
Got a risk window, how much you need the human built in. All that's been calculated. When a research lab does that at UC, they're calculating the science behind it to get to the exact amount that you need the human involved, exact amount where the risk profile is, right? When a human does it in a business, they're trying to make as much money as they can to get as much money made as they can. And they don't take as much responsibility. So the academics are preaching responsible AI and then ways to implement that. And then the businesses, it's up to them to actually put that program in place internally.
Well, what you're describing, thinking more practical application for consulting and advisory firms, where my mind goes to is like big data sets of proprietary research in whatever client base you have, right? So like in our case, for example, like we have our our growth cap assessment, where it's a bunch of questions, and over time we can have that data set over a bunch of different firms, different sizes, different revenue things, whatever. And now if we can combine that with, say, another data set of whatever, call it growth success or whatever, now we can have a model go in there and say, hey, if your executives are answering these questions in this way, you should be on the lookout for a 20% decrease in revenue because you're clearly missing X, Y, and Z type thing.
And it can make some of those assumptions, not always, because data lies to you.
Mm-hmm.
So typically data is going to lie. Like, it's not like if I have 500 Excel sheet columns and a bunch of different rows, if I ask the wrong question of the data, it's going to give me an answer, and it's going to tell me an answer that leads me down the wrong track. So it's not like because you have data and you've got a way to ask it questions, you get the right answers. Like that's where I feel like humans are super powerful. Like we are the determining factor. It helps us make good decisions, because in my mind, data is sort of is the lie. Like, and then we have to formalize it and then check it and validate it and then compare it and then run our experience against it and then ask specific questions that give us insights. But just to feed a data for nothing, like we got tons of data on stuff that comes in, like it's out of control. And you're like, you ask a question of it and you're like, that makes no sense. Or I'll see a graph from a report. That's why you have meta-analysis, for God's sakes. Like that's why you have 10 different research analysis is going at the same problem in different ways. And then you get a meta-analysis and you find a new discovery that they didn't realize that's where the value was, because the data was kind of lying to each one individually, right? So I look at it the same way, but what you're saying makes total sense. And in that mind, and like from an advisory firm perspective, if your client has data, it's most likely increased in value by 100 times. It's almost up to you to be able to unlock that. So you should develop expertise in AI in general with large language models. 2, you should develop expertise with workflow analysis groups. You should develop relationships with firms like myself or like firms that specialize in AI science that can get you plugged into the ecosystem. So now you're referring in partners that can bring that value to unlock that data's value for that organization. So you should be hunting in, not just, you don't have to be the expert in all things, but you should find them. And you should interact on them. You should explore. You should put activity in that direction. I mean, somebody, if you're an advisory firm, you should know a telecom guy. You should know an internet service provider. You should know a data guy. You should know a Microsoft 365 guy. You need to know a data science guy now. And it needs to not be your cousin, unless your cousin's like awesome ninja data science guy. It should be like a professional group that knows what they're doing.
So let's talk about data a little bit more. So what are the things that advisory firms need to be thinking about, either their own data or their clients' data, in terms of to make it usable for these applications?
There's a quick win I'm seeing for advisory firms right off the bat. A quick win is like I have a company. I'm 30 employees. I have a document that I complete for my clients on them from a regulatory standpoint. That document may take me so many people per year to hire to fill it out for all of them, right? I can use AI to look at all the documents that I have completed and then now auto-complete 90% of the new documents for me, and then 10% can be reviewed, checked, and then filled in. I now can gain X number of revenue for this autocomplete function for my organization because I can add a new service to more clients. I can then hire now 2 new people to do that. It's a quick business decision. An advisory firm can find an opportunity to look like that for an organization that's huge. They now have spun up a new line of service. An advisory firm should be looking at organizations that have an incredible amount of contracts. A lot of people, and if they're international and have complexities to the contracts, typically if you're in contracts and you have, let's say, 100,000 contracts with 100,000 different organizations, and it's North America and South America or Europe, or maybe Africa, or maybe Asia, then you have to deal with lawyers across all those continents. You have to deal with compliance and regulation across all those continents. You have to deal with language drift and you have what's called golden contracts, and that golden contract language has to uplift as along with all of the legislation that happens in all those different municipalities across all those countries. So you're paying an arm and a leg for legal. So most likely you can set up a LLM of some sort to look at your contract portfolio and find risk problems or translation issues or drift from your golden contract. Call an AI science group. They may be able to help you. The other thing is that there's other tools that are getting put in place for generative AI. So for instance, if you have a legal management software, maybe they're adding generative module in place into their software for you to, you need to understand that. So it's on you to learn more and deeper about the application. Before it's like, oh, just use this legal management software.
That's actually an interesting thing you bring up. If we could pause there for a minute, because again, I'm just thinking about our, we have a team of 7, very boutique, but we have a bunch of tools. Every single freaking tool has some sort of AI, and I put it in quotes on purpose because some of it is just a basic bolt on onto, ChatGPT, but every single tool has some sort of AI capability that they're touting, they're putting out, whatever.
But it's only for that tool, right?
Correct. But it's easy to just go, oh, all right, well, let's use whatever. We use ClickUp. ClickUp's got some AI functionality now. Let's just start using that, right? Or, hey, we're on Google Workplace. They're starting to roll stuff out. That's a little broader. That's maybe a bad example in this case. But like, there are all these spot solutions with AI capability. But it feels like it's really easy to just jump in and start using it without really understanding, where's this data going? How is it being secured? What else is it getting access to? Like all these things that just because it's easy, oh yeah, I'll check this box. I've got this enabled for my team. Cool, we're good to go.
So
how do you recommend that companies address that?
Well, the problem right now is like SaaS, SOC type 2. I mean, applications and things like that don't cover AI a whole lot yet. Right now, Salesforce came out with what they're calling the trust layer. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. So they created a layer across their application, which was like this whole security trust layer where generative would take place in. And it sort of segments it from everything else. Thus, anything in and out of that is highly controlled and to another degree beyond. So you're kind of like, okay, they exposed what that architecture was. They labeled it. They named it. They had a plan. Now, if I'm generative on Salesforce, I'm like, that's awesome. Like, that's great. But that only gives, I'm not saying Salesforce specifically, but for a lot of companies, if I have, like you talked ClickUp, I think it's called.
Yep.
If you put an AI in there, the AI is limited in scope to ClickUp, but maybe you have 10 other applications. You'd almost want one to look at all of it together, right? It's so you're kind of, and you have the costs included as well, which SaaS applications are already known to increase their price by like 30% every year or two. So when's that going to end? So in my mind, you can look at it a couple ways. One is we start feeding our own data. We build our own intelligence repository in the company. So now we have an email server. We have our own email like environment. We have our own ERP. We should probably have our own intelligence platform. And I know, like, I'm just going to give you an example, like P&G. They probably, like, I think there's a Chat PG. So they took ChatGPT, OpenAI, and they made their own version of it, and it's released internally. I think it's called Chat PG, right? That's a type of solution. Now they have this general purpose thing that you can use across your different applications, and they'll build integrations. It's kind of like their own knowledge base, and it's going to appreciate over time. It's going to get smarter. Because when OpenAI releases OpenAI 5.0 and they put it in place, now you get an intelligence, reasoning, and logic deduction and mathematics capability enhancement. And it's already on your data. So all your data now is just much more valuable and much more accessible. So same thing with what you're talking about with these SaaS applications. You can get overrun with how many there are. And everybody uses them like crazy. So I get on like LinkedIn, for instance, which is content generation. I'd say 95% of the people I look at that are like, they're using AI generated content. That's what I'm looking at. I'm like, why don't I just go to ChatGPT and talk to it? Like, why am I looking on LinkedIn? I try to write my own stuff because at some point you're saying like the data comes in, like, how do you know? If you just rely on it at all times, like my brother, he's like this super smart wizard guy. he's incredibly intelligent. He's not going to use AI ever. Like, he has all these ethical things with it, and he thinks it devalues his own mind. So he tries not to use it as much as possible. I actually am very similar. I try to use it for when it's a good tool, but I try not to abuse it because I'm lessening my own brain resiliency. I'm not challenging myself, all those other things. Sorry.
Well, that's actually no. That I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the when we were starting out and I was framing this. One of the things I mentioned is this whole idea of as an again we're talking advisory firms, consulting firms. Like that's a you're being paid for your expertise, right? So I am, Joseph is, you are, etc. Right? So the idea there is well, at what point does the usage of AI, and we can talk about content in particular, but even more broadly, at what point does that devalue your expertise as a human? I think, I don't know if this is what you're getting at, but you mentioned he was a human-led initiatives. Is that something you?
Human in the loop. Yep. Human in the loop or human value. I have
Yeah, you said human-led initiatives. I wrote it down. I don't know if this was related to this or something else, but that's where my head was going with it. Like, again, if I'm whatever, I'm a boutique management consulting firm. I've got 220 people on staff, of which say 200 are actual consultants that are doing work all the time. Right? They're fully billable, whatever it is. At what level, like what should they be doing with, and this is broad, it probably depends on what industry, whatever, but like where's that level for you, like as you're thinking about it? Like where, maybe a good idea is like using your team. I don't know. I mean, you're in a slightly different space. So I don't know if that's
it depends. All sorts of teams use it different ways. I see companies using it. I'll give you an example from like a Accenture type group. They gave Code Assist to all their developers, and they improved their efficiency by something like 45%. I believe they reduced their fees per hour by like 5% because clients were like saying, hey, or 10% even. Yep. And then their profit margins are still fatter, right? NVIDIA is trying to get to 0 developers on staff and then have AI develop all software for its chip, all of its firmware. It's got higher quality control. They're having robots design all their chips. So they're really far ahead from us. The day ChatGPT came out, I literally gave it to everybody in the organization. And I was like, hey, start using this as a virtual assistant. Be careful about what you put in on it. And we have monitoring tools and education programs around it.
All right. So let's talk about that for a minute. Cause I feel like you mentioned this earlier, like, hey, if I were to start, like let people start playing with it, which I agree with you on that. What should, again, let's use the example of like a boutique management consulting firm. Like they don't have a giant IT or in cybersecurity, like in-house staff. They probably outsource a lot of it, that kind of thing. What are the like security protocols or whatever that you put in place for say ChatGPT use? Like, hey, we have 200 people, you're each going to get your own license, $20 a month, go.
First things first, like you can buy the Copilot, which gets you everybody there if you want. That's kind of a version of ChatGPT that Microsoft's made. Microsoft's actually contributing to the OpenAI ecosystem now. So there's like kind of a dynamic relationship there about who owns what tools and how they work together. But you get your people using it and then educate them. So hold a weekly webinar or a monthly webinar, bring in a consultant. In fact, there's free classes now. For instance, you can use George Washington University, NKU, Northern Kentucky University is releasing an adult or business AI training skills class. There's YouTube videos. My buddy Christopher Brock has a Netflix for AI education program online he's created for learning and so forth. But you make those tools available for your people and you encourage them to read it, and you use chat or like Teams or Slack or whatever to push that message out. Who's in charge of the organization? Well, at Nexagen, it was me. So I'm the CEO. I founded the company with my co-founder, JJ Schaefer. But I took it on my own shoulders, right? At some organizations, you're going to have a IT administrator, and he's going to have curiosity. You want him to take that on, or you'll have somebody who's a software developer, or you'll have an office administrator. They're going to have that responsibility. They may sign up with one of those firms to handle that for them and outsource that. It could be part of an HR program. Then as far as securing it, you should talk to your MSP or your cybersecurity provider. and they should have an answer for you. So you have what's called shadow IT. So kind of what I did originally was actually problematic for most organizations because they don't want everyone interacting with individual AI systems because there's sensitive data that can go into it.
Mhm.
With our organization, we had a lot of trainings around it of what could go in it and what could go out of it. And we had a lot of touch points and coaching sessions, put it that way. So we were very careful, but we allowed access in a careful manner. Now, what we do is we have what's called a shadow IT blocking system. So we put an application in place. It tells us every single SaaS application in place. It rates the SaaS application from a security standpoint. It lets us know if the SaaS application has generative capabilities or not. It lets us know if we're using them. It lets us know if they have a SOC Type 2 audit in place, all these other things. And then we can block or deny that access. So if someone's using corporate credentials on a non-approved application, it's flagged, blocked, not allowed, right? So now that we've blocked the roads to Rome, we create our new one.
What about clarifying question on that? What about client data? So credentials I get. What about, again, I'm just thinking of like, I'm trying to think of an example.
Responding to an email, like if they could send
Yeah,
sensitive
could
information
be
in an
responding
email.
to an email. I'm thinking of more like, hey, like call transcription, recording, and summaries, right? We use tools for that. Like now
For sure. Yeah.
those
That's totally,
those are secure. But what if somebody takes that transcript and dumps it into a tool that's not, for example?
yeah, it happens all the time. So I was kind of saying you block the bad pathways and then you create a golden road is what we call it. And that golden road is to your AI system that you allow in the system. And that maybe that's Copilot, maybe that's ChatGPT, and that's accounts that you paid for and that you have monitoring around and so forth. Then we put in a specific monitoring application that blocks and monitors. So it blocks and tackles and it monitors everything that's occurring. And you get reporting on that, right? Then from there, you're talking about chat logs and so forth. So then you could apply that golden road and you could say, hey, we take 2,000 calls a day. Those calls right now are being recorded. A human reviews those manual recordings. We don't hear everything that happens. There could be opportunities, problems, all these other things. Well, on those call recordings, if I add AI to it and they're looking at the transcripts and they're listening to it, now I'm finding new sales opportunities. I'm talking about new sales talking tracks. That's actually one of the first golden nuggets that most companies put in place is actually looking at that gap right there that exists. And they're actually getting value out of it almost immediately. I've seen companies turn around that idea into production in 30 days. Using their own LLM. I've seen organizations then buy their call centering software and add on a module. You could look at the price differential between those two. Sometimes doing it yourself is more value. And then you can also leverage that tool for more than one application. So that's the choice you have to make. If I use RingCentral's generative AI system for my call center, then RingCentral has that data value and that value only exists there. But if I put my own in, now I can get the value myself, my own, and I can take that same system and I can get value across my ERP or somewhere else as well. So you can really get more value out of that foundational model if it's owned in certain instances. But when I say it's owned, you don't have to buy hardware and so forth. You can use like Microsoft and Amazon, or you could use Custom GPT, or you could use one of these other groups to spin it up.
In your mind, I'm curious, is there a, I don't know, some sort of criteria you look at in terms of like the different levels of investment? Like, hey, a company that's, less than, I'm going to make this up, less than $5 million and less than 20 employees, like you shouldn't be doing anything other than Custom GPT because it doesn't make sense or whatever.
Well, there's
Totally made that up.
with them, there's kind of, you need a dev, somebody who has some dev experience on staff. I think that's really inherent. Like when we hire people, if you have DevOps experience, we're like, hey, we're really, we weight that higher now with our interviewing process across the board over the last like 3-4 years. We always weighted it higher already before though. But
So do you think that, are you saying that organizations of any kind, even if they're not like you, where it's software development and things like that, like again, take management consulting or a accounting firm or whatever, where dev is not a core skill set traditionally, should they be bringing those skill sets in house at some point?
yeah, because you just have to connect to the thing securely, and the dev should know how to do that so functionally. And then 2, you'll have like workflow automation suites. So like, for instance, you don't even really need a crazy dev. You could do this very insecurely. You can just spin up a public version of ChatGPT, then you can sign in to make.com or Zapier, and then you get workflow automation. So then from there, So Copilot costs, I don't know, $30 a month, and it hooks into your email and everything else. But if you use like Zapier or Make.com, this is where I call them stitchers. They're not really AI scientists. They just kind of are workflow people. So they'll get you a GPT account for $20 a month. They'll get you a Make.com account. They'll connect in the credentials to your email. So now they've effectively connected the public version of GPT into your private version of email, and they're reading your emails and your calendars, right? Then they're hooking it into your LinkedIn, so they're authenticating there. Now they're creating automations between. They're looking at your voice in your email. They're looking at your voice from your LinkedIn, and now they're saying, "Hey, make posts automated in this sequence with another application based on this voice that I want to replicate." Right, and you can do that very quickly and easily, and start stitching these things together. You can do it from the invoicing side. You can do it on. I've seen people do it all over the place, especially on marketing automation. Right, so these are all available tools. It's just to secure that, you would literally put an LLM firewall on the side of the LLM. So where the API connects in the LLM, you would then connect it into the LLM firewall, and then from there into the LLM. And now you get all your chat logs, so and not just the transcripts from your calls, but everybody that's talking to the LLM. So even if APIs are talking to it, you get a record of that. Then you see how the LLM is being used. So for instance, even your 7 people, it's people process technology. You're trying to give your people the most value out of the technology using the best process. So when you look at the AI, if that's going to be foundational to everything, then you better store the chat logs or the activity going in and out of it. And you better be using AI to analyze that. Now you know how those 7 people are using that tool. And then if you do data analysis on that, you'll find ways they're using the tool better. And that's actually how OpenAI launched. They had the courage to just launch. And it was horrible. It was awesome and amazing, but it said awful things. And then they looked at the chat logs, and then they just improved it. So when you build and go the foundational model ways, even if you're 7 people, I mean, a 7-person organization can generate good revenue nowadays. 2, if it's 10 to 20 grand on like a custom GPT type model and we secure it, you're looking at like 30 grand a year. I don't know, 35 grand a year for that application that runs intelligence for your entire organization and enables all these workflows I'm talking about. That it's kind of worth it as long as you can manage it correctly. And maybe you can double your revenues and hire 25% more staff. Devs seem to be coming on the market more often. In fact, I heard a rumor. I'm not going to say I'm 100% sure, but like Kroger let go of 30% of their data scientists. I mean, they're on the market, and they're probably going to get picked up by somebody. But there's developers also in the market as well, because people are using Code Assist. So now there's developers in the market, and they're going to be ready and learning and available as well. So if I'm an organization, I am leaning in towards DevOps. I'm leaning in towards developers, even though everybody's saying they don't want them anymore. They're still super valuable.
Interesting. How are we doing on time? Are we? Oh,
We're a minute over,
we're at
but
time. We're a minute over. Okay.
We got through all of it. I'm talking. I'm sorry.
No,
it's great.
This is great. I mean, Joseph, you go ahead. I think you had a question.
yeah, I mean, John, are you good on time if we go a couple minutes over?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's super interesting about this conversation, and I'm definitely very much the layman. I mean, I've dabbled with AI for sure, but nowhere near your level. But a couple of things you said that stick out to me, like if I'm thinking, how am I going to apply AI? One is, what are the tasks that nobody in our company even wants to do? Is there a way we can automate those? So I think your example of that, the transaction, logging or whatever that was, or invoices, or with your or your sales team, like if you can use AI to fill out your sales force after you've met with a client, and you could do the same thing, like that's the kind of stuff that everybody in your team will be excited about. And it's going to enable your team to focus on the things where they actually bring value, because your sales team focusing their time on filling out Salesforce is not a good use of their time. So, I think that's a great place to think about is where can we do that,
That, and I want to bring this up real quick. So I'm a advisory board member for the Plunk Foundation, which is a security initiative. I think there's certification and validation programs where they're going to put stamps on artificial general intelligence or like generative AI systems, as well as privacy by design certifications. And then I think those are going to be, when you see those stamps, those start to become the defaults. And then, yes, I agree with everything you said, Joseph. I just had to make sure I plugged Plunk Foundation.
I mean, and then one more thing is you kind of brought this up a little bit, but I've thought about this a lot. Just I've done a lot of writing, And when I'm talking to younger marketers or people who, if you're not a marketer for sure, it's like, oh yeah, I use ChatGPT to write my emails, or I use it to write posts or things like that. And to me, I use AI to maybe speed something up and get me closer to the process and edit it, especially like if there's a video that I've recorded or an interview, getting a transcript and having it do something with that is extremely helpful. And then I'm putting my input in where it matters. But I think there is people are outsourcing their writing, because when you write and you learn how to write, you're learning how to think. And what you were talking about before with like, don't outsource your mind, you're really doing that if you lean too heavily on AI for writing. So like, I think that's a really important thing for me is you got to write and learn how to write well, learn how to articulate a thought, and then you could use AI to make it better and improve it. But
that's correct. It gives you options. It gives you options. So I had a developer I work with on our team at RoveIQ, which is our smart city company, and this guy's brilliant. And he said every developer runs into like, they'll work on something for 2 weeks. It's a complex problem, but then they'll have these points in time where they just get stuck. It's like writer's block, because they're like authors too, right? And they just can't work through it. And it'll take them a week to work through it. They create some distance and they look at it from different angles, and then they find the solution. Well, with AI, you bring it to AI and it gives you 100 options. You're brute forcing the problem with thought, right? And then now they're not stuck anymore. So in a way, they've weakened their own resolve because they haven't challenged their mind to work through it. In a way, what you're saying is sort of like a crutch. We can lean on whatever we want. So personal control, self-discipline, and all those things matter with any tool, and specifically this one. I'm getting challenged where I'm holding meetings with like 15 people. 7 otters will show up, which is an automated virtual attendant for meetings. It'll record the conversation. It'll send notes to the person. It'll actually do screenshots of what's being presented on the screen. If that person is attending 7 meetings and not at any of them, they still don't know what's being said. They can search the logs all they want, but they didn't get the essence of the conversation. They missed the point. So I don't do that. I use Otter sometimes too, but that you can just use it as a crutch, and then now you're limping. And
let me throw one more thought in, because I know Mike's going to jump in, but let me throw one more thought, because I want your guys' thoughts on this. Like, as far as AI and what we're talking about here, to me, like as I'm talking to younger marketers and they're going, what should I be focusing on? To me, it's what are the things that you're using your mind to problem solve something that AI is going to really struggle with. And to me, those are the things that there's not good data on, where you need to make a connection that's kind of disparate is one thing. But the other piece is relationships. Like AI is not going to make a relationship with another person. And, in any field.
Sure as hell are trying with that. I forget the name of the company that's having like the, like you can talk to like dead people or whatever.
Otter will respond on your meetings. So you can buy the professional version, and it listens to all your conversations and it reads your emails. And when someone asks you a question, your virtual Otter will respond as you. So that's
a little scary to me. But like you can't outsource, like, especially when you make a human interaction and you're connecting on like, well, you got skis in the background. You go to Perfect North, it can't build that human connection. And so if there's a job where that human connection is required, like that's a place where you can develop that skill. And that's going to be, in my mind, way more valuable as time goes on, because there's going to be less of that. And so anyway, I'm curious what you guys think of that, if I'm thinking of that right, or if I'm totally on the wrong track when it comes to implementing AI and all these pieces.
Mike's Car Wash is what I always bring up. Mike's Car Wash is an awesome car wash organization in the Midwest. It's owned by this guy, Mike Dom, who's like one of the best humans I've met. His family owned another car wash in Indianapolis called Mike's Car Wash, but both of the boys had so many children. I think it was like 25 children between the two of them that they couldn't pass down the business. So they split it in two, and the grandfather was all about service and humans. And as the car wash industry has evolved, it's moved into this automated procedure, and Mike's Car Wash hires more people per car wash than like any other car wash in the country. They're also the most profitable. They're also growing faster than just about all of them, and they're more healthy, and they provide better service. And that is a way that you can move forward, focusing on the service like you're talking about and the human aspect of the relationship. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because the place where I've gone with all this is like, what's the real economic value, or even just societal value, both of those things, for many of these given use cases, right? So I mean, obviously, I get more exposed to the marketing side of things. That's what we do, and when I see this like insane amount of automated outreach and LinkedIn comments and all this kind of stuff. And you can, like right now, you could tell. Like right now, you can generally pick it out like that. Like, okay, this is, you didn't write this. I know where this came from. Now, realistically, within the next year, it's very likely that you won't be able to pick it out. At least maybe not, maybe only 50% of the time or something. But even if that's the case, what's the real value in that? You just increased the volume of noise. Did you actually improve anything? And if you gave yourself more time to do other things, are you actually doing more important things, or are you just giving yourself more time to add even more noise? So it's like, I that's where my head goes with all this stuff, is like, not just are you gaining efficiency, and is that efficiency worth some level of economic value or societal value, but what are you doing with that efficiency gain?
So there's this thing in AI. There's this famous paper that was written. It's like one of the most famous papers of all the AI researchers. There's a bunch of them that like think step by step, and another one, but there's one that's called "All You Attention is All You Need," and it's sort of like attention is kind of like human awareness, and it's sort of how the LLMs kind of. I think it's an interesting title of paper. It's an unbelievably interesting paper. But where are you putting your attention is what you're kind of saying. Like, where are you putting your awareness? And like that actually dictates to like the person you are, the people you interact with, the activities that happen towards you. The world is such an incredibly complex environment, and you could put your attention in 1,000 different places at this very moment, but we chose to be here. So since we're here, let's put our attention here and let's get value out of this conversation. And when people try to take their attention and spread it everywhere, there's always going to be loss. No matter how hard you try, you're just going to have loss. It's not going to be the same quality.
I think that's probably as good a place to end as any.
All right.
I think it's very philosophical, but very, I think, poignant in terms of not. Again, obviously, we're talking about how advisory firms can use AI, but I think more broadly speaking, too, I think as the leader of an advisory firm, like that's, I think, a very good way to think about it is, where's your attention going? Because at the end of the day, you're getting paid to provide expertise, and while AI can help you with that, I don't think it can replace it completely.
Still need the humans. We're not so easy to replicate.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, John. This has been great. Might have to do a round 2 at some point.
I love it. That's awesome. You guys are great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Hold on, I'm hitting in stream, but it's not ending.